All right. Well, welcome once again to Open Door Biker Church. It's great to be here in the presence of the Lord, and I am glad to see you all. If you're tuning in online, I'm really glad that you're there. And if you are online or if you're here, just make sure you go to our YouTube page and subscribe and hit the notification button so you can know when we put stuff on YouTube. It's really beneficial for us if we know who's out there and maybe make a comment, let us know where you are. That's kind of nice to know. Now, as we turn our thoughts toward Easter, now that it's April, and we start to look ahead a little bit toward Easter, and the sacrifice that our Lord made for us at Easter, we're going to take the next few weeks and we're going to look at some of the events that led up to that sacrifice that He made, that supreme sacrifice that He made for all of us. And tonight we're going to specifically look at a fellow named Judas. And you've probably heard that name. You're probably familiar with him. But we're going to take a little closer look at Judas. He's probably known as the biggest betrayer, the biggest traitor in the history of mankind. But we're going to take just a closer examination of him. But before we go there, let's just take a moment. I want to look at a couple of other notorious traitors, notorious betrayers in history. The first one I will look at is a fellow from American history by the name of Benedict Arnold. Now, you've probably all heard that name, Benedict Arnold. It's synonymous with traitor. Benedict Arnold came from some very humble means, and he took the occasion of the American Revolution to try to advance himself, to advance his career, his military career, to advance his monetary prospects in the same vein. He was actually a friend of General George Washington. And Washington, on more than one occasion, interceded for him when he would get himself into questionable circumstances. When he'd find himself wrapped up in some questionable issues, Washington would come to his aid, would intercede. When Arnold's temper got the better of him, it was Washington who came to his aid and interceded and stood in front of Congress and defended him. When Congress wanted to replace him, Arnold had been wounded in battle, and it was questionable as to whether or not he would ever even walk again, let alone command troops. And Congress wanted to retire him, and Washington didn't want that, and Benedict Arnold didn't want that. Washington ended up giving Arnold command of the colonial forces at West Point, where we now have the West Point Academy. That was a critical outpost as it guarded the inland waterway and kept British ships from going inland and launching an invasion even further up the river. Now, we know, looking back at history, Arnold did not really appreciate all the things that Washington had done for him. We look back at history and we can see that he didn't appreciate the intercession. He didn't appreciate anything that Washington had done on his behalf. He betrayed Washington by plotting to surrender West Point to the British forces and give them clear access all the way up the Hudson. He literally was going to trade that outpost for a British Army commission. See, Benedict Arnold felt that Washington could no longer do for him what he wanted to accomplish in his life. He figured that he couldn't achieve the military successes under Washington anymore because things were against him. And he couldn't achieve the financial successes because things were turned against him. So he was frustrated. He gave up. He decided to look for another way, look for somebody else to serve. As a result, when the war was over, he couldn't stay in the Americas. He retired to England, but the English didn't accept him because he was a traitor, and he ended up dying in relative obscurity. I want to look at another man by the name of Simon Fraser. Now, we as Americans probably do not recognize the name Simon Fraser, but if you lived in Scotland, you'd probably be familiar with Simon Fraser. He was a Scottish nobleman. He was a lord, and he achieved his lordship through some questionable means. See, he was born to nobility, but he wasn't the first son. He wasn't the son that was in line to inherit the lordship. In fact, he was kind of far down on the rung. So through some means that were deceptive and some deceit, he even kidnapped the widow of the true Lord and forced her into marriage. And by that means, he was able to rise in the aristocracy. He was able to force himself in there. Now, that in and of itself would be notable in history. That would be that would get him notoriety. It would make him become notorious. But he's really known for his role in the Jacobite rebellions. See, there were several of those, but the last one of those, Fraser had a propensity to change sides. He, during the last Jacobite War in 1745, he pledged his loyalty to the English, helped them plan the battle at Culloden. He was set to lead troops, English troops, in the Battle of Culloden. But at the very last minute, he switched his loyalty to Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Stuart dynasty that was trying to force its way back into Scottish rule. After the English defeated those Scottish forces at Culloden, which was a rout, it was terrible, Fraser was exposed. This massive treachery that he had perpetrated was exposed to everybody. And while he was hiding in the highlands of Scotland, the English were able to track him down, and they captured him, and they transported him to London, and they tried him for high treason. And in 1747, at the age of 80, Simon Fraser was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. He has the distinction of being the last person to be executed by beheading by that royal government. Simon Fraser was looking to side with whichever leaders would benefit him the most. Fraser made poor choices, and as a result, he lost his life in disgrace. Now let's look at that most famous betrayer of all time. Let's look at Judas. Let's pick up in Matthew chapter 26, and we're going to start in verse 14. It says this, then one of the 12 apostles, the one named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests. He asks, "What will you pay me if I hand him over to you?" I guess one of the very first things we need to do, if we're going to look at this, one of the very first things we need to do is decide, how do you personally view Judas? I mean, when somebody says the name Judas, what do you see in your mind's eye? Do you picture this sinister fella? This guy that's plotting all the time? Maybe he was kind of shifty in your mind. Maybe he's got these beady eyes, and that's how you view him. Well, here's a fact for you. Judas was a respected disciple of Jesus. And we don't think of him like that, but Judas was a respected disciple of Jesus. When Jesus, at the Last Supper, said, "One of you is going to betray me," it wasn't a matter of the other 11 turned to Judas and went, "I know what you're going to do." That wasn't it. They didn't suspect him. He was trusted. He was respected. I mean, he was in charge of the money. You don't take somebody that you think is kind of an evil guy, kind of a sinister guy, and go, "Here, carry the money bag because, whatever, we don't trust you, but we'll give it to you." You don't do that. So if inherently Judas was not evil, if inherently he wasn't the sinister guy, his nature wasn't that way, what caused Judas to betray Christ? For Benedict Arnold, it was money, it was prestige, it was pride. For Simon Fraser, it was whoever could benefit him the most. But what caused Judas to betray Christ? Now, I think there are a few factors, but I think foremost, I think in these contributing factors, I think it was frustration. And you say, "Well, frustration, what are you talking about?" Well, here it is. Judas was frustrated because Jesus was not doing what Judas thought he should do. Now think about that for a minute. Judas was frustrated because Jesus wasn't doing what Judas thought Jesus should be doing when Judas thought Jesus should be doing it. It wasn't on the time frame that Judas thought it should be. Now think about that one. We've all been frustrated at Jesus at some point because whatever we were after, it wasn't on our time frame, it was on his. We've all been frustrated with Jesus. But Judas was so frustrated with Jesus that it moved him to action. You see, Judas thought that if Jesus, he thought that Jesus should be there to overthrow the Roman oppressors. He thought the Roman government should be thrown out of Israel, and that's what Jesus was there for. He was the Messiah, after all. He was supposed to deliver them. He thought that Jesus should be ending the injustice that was being perpetrated on the Jewish people. Now, when Jesus didn't do that in the way that Judas thought he should, well, then Judas attempted to force the issue. In his mind, Judas thought, well, if I push Jesus into a corner, if I back him into a corner, he'll either come out fighting or we'll find him out to be a fraud. Either way, there was action. What Judas didn't count on was that Jesus was counting on being backed into a corner. It was his plan all along. Think about that one. Think about what Judas did. We think about it and we get really disappointed at Judas and his betrayal. But what we forget, what we miss, was that Judas was not the only disciple that betrayed Jesus. We don't think about it like that. But Judas was not the only disciple to betray Jesus. Matthew 26, verse 31. Then Jesus said to them, all of you will abandon me tonight. When they came for Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, we learned that every disciple that was there ran away. Every disciple ran. And that one disciple that didn't run away, the one that followed him, the one that stayed there, well, he denied him. He denied that he even knew Jesus. He verbally betrayed Jesus by saying, I never met that man. Now, when we look at Judas, we should be scared. We should look at Judas and in our hearts, we should be like, man, that should really frighten us. Because no matter how much we don't think so, there are times we look like Judas. How similar are we to Judas? When we consider that he was a respected disciple, we consider that on the surface he looked very normal. We consider that he was trusted and he was respected. And then we consider Judas and his betrayal. And there are a couple of things that we should know, because we look like that sometimes. But there are a couple of things that we should notice, we should remember. First, we should remember that Judas had a price. If Jesus would not deliver justice to Judas on his schedule, if he wouldn't get rid of the oppressors that oppressed Judas on a regular basis, if he wasn't going to do that the way Judas thought he should, then he wasn't going to follow Christ anymore. As far as Judas was concerned, what good was it to follow Jesus if he wouldn't help the situation? And when Jesus did not perform the things that Judas felt he should be doing, he betrayed him. He sold him out for 30 pieces of silver. This begs the question. This puts the question out there. What is your price? What does Jesus have to do to keep your loyalty? What conditions do you put on your relationship with Christ so that you will continue to follow him? Really, people list all kinds of reasons why they stop following Jesus. Could be because something that they thought he should do, he didn't do for them. Could be a blessing that they thought that they deserved that they didn't get. A promotion at work, their marriage repaired and fixed, more money in their bank account, a healing that they felt like they deserved. And in their minds, they rationalize it. They say things like, it was a really simple request, just heal me. You could do it with a word. It was easy. It was just a simple request. It doesn't take much for Jesus to grant that for me. But whatever the reason, when they didn't get that promotion or that healing or that extra money, they thought, okay, well, that's it. We think that's it. What's the point in following you? I had such a really small request, just a really small something. It would have been really easy for you to grant it, but you didn't. And that's where Judas was. Some people, they only follow Jesus when it's convenient, when it doesn't cost them very much. They follow him when it doesn't cost them their popularity. They follow him when it fits into their agenda. It doesn't cost them any extra time or effort. They follow him when they have the time to do it, or when it's comfortable. But here's the true measure of your loyalty to Jesus. The test of whether it's genuine or not is when you follow him when it's not convenient. The value that you put on something, the value you put on loyalty, is shown in what you're willing to give up to obtain it. If you walk away from Jesus because something he does or something he doesn't do doesn't suit you, then how much value do you put on your relationship with him? What are you going to do when following him requires a 180-degree turn from your plan? That's where Judas was. We want to think about coming to Jesus and following him as bringing us peace and fulfillment. And it's true. Following him will bring you peace and fulfillment. But at some point, following him is going to cost you something. And what are you going to do at that point? What cost could there be to you in your daily life that would cause you to not follow Jesus? Maybe that cost to you would be having to downplay Jesus to your friends when you're around them. Yeah, I believe in Jesus, but I'm not that wrapped up in him. You don't want to be known as a Jesus freak. That would be kind of weird. Maybe that cost to you in your life would be, well, I'll give him Sundays, but I don't want to give him my Saturdays. I like my Saturdays. I like doing my stuff on Saturdays. Maybe that's the cost. Maybe that cost is that you have to spend more time on Jesus stuff. More time focused on kingdom values. But sometimes we don't want to do that. You'd rather focus on your stuff. Maybe the cost is a relationship that you don't want to give up. Deep down, it's a relationship with somebody that's not good for you. It's not a good relationship, but it's comfortable and you like it. Now, here's the thing. When you find something that's worth your loyalty, when you find something that's worth a great price, you go for it. These other things, when you look at these things, that if I do these, it may cost me my personal stuff. That's what your value is. That's what your price is. That's your 30 pieces of silver. I don't want to give up my Saturdays. I don't want to be unpopular. That's your 30 pieces of silver. When you realize that, or when you compromise and you don't follow him, at that point, that's the point that you realize that Jesus alone is not good enough for you. Jesus alone is not good enough for you. You realize that at that point, you need Jesus, but you need something else as well. Something you don't want to give up. So one of the first things we need to know about about Judas is that he had a price. Another thing we need to remember about Judas as we look at it is that Judas misunderstood Jesus. Judas traveled with Jesus. He lived with Jesus. He ate with Jesus. But he didn't understand what Jesus was all about. He thought that Jesus' primary mission was to punish anyone who had wronged Judas, who had wronged the Jews. He thought that Jesus' primary mission was to punish the wrongdoers and make Judas' life better. That's why he thought if Jesus kicked the Romans out of Israel, things would be better. He thought that Jesus would come and eliminate the Roman oppression, the oppression that was crushing the Jewish people. He thought that Jesus was there just for that. But he wasn't doing it. And he thought that if he pushed him into a corner, Jesus would come out fighting. But instead of coming to punish the Romans, instead of coming to push the Romans out and restore Israel, Jesus came preaching a message of grace and forgiveness to outsiders. Outsiders, can you imagine? Not even just the Jews. Now that message of grace and forgiveness sounds great to us now. We can really appreciate a message of grace and forgiveness. We all need it. But you know, there are those of us now and people like Judas then that they just couldn't get that. They didn't understand it. You see, Judas was a rule follower. It's probably why he had the money back. He was a rule follower. He felt that if you followed the rules, you should be rewarded. Seems fair. I follow the rules. There should be a prize at the end of that. For a rule follower, the idea that you can act however you want and still be forgiven, well, that drives them crazy. And before you say, I'm not that guy, let's think about it for a minute. How do you feel when God blesses somebody that did you wrong? How do you feel when God blesses somebody that just wronged you? How do you feel when God blesses somebody who hasn't sacrificed as much for you or as much as you? Somebody who hasn't given as much as you. Somebody who still claims all their Saturdays for themselves while you're out sharing the gospel. We've all been there. We've all looked at somebody like that and said, it's just not fair. I've been more faithful than them. I've made more sacrifices than that other guy over there. And when we do that, we believe that we deserve more blessing than they. When we do that, we believe that we deserve the blessings. And that's where Judas was. What Judas missed out on was the fact that he didn't deserve any of the blessings that he had gotten. He didn't deserve to be blessed by God. What he needed was huge amounts of grace and forgiveness. What he needed was to ask Jesus for mercy. But instead he asked Jesus for justice. I've got news for you. One of the last things we ever want to do is ask God for justice. Because if he gave us the justice that we deserved, we would be in a world of hurt. What we need to do is ask Jesus for mercy. The ministry of Jesus was not about rewarding the righteous. In fact, there were no righteous people to be found. Nor was his ministry about punishing sinners. Can you imagine? If he'd been there just to punish sinners, nobody would have been safe. Everybody would have been punished. No, Jesus' primary role was to save the guilty by dying for their sins. Another mistake that Jesus made was was thinking that he would be rewarded by Jesus with an earthly blessing. He heard Jesus talk about the kingdom of heaven, but he still thought that the blessing was going to be earthly. He was looking for a reward, peace in his land, health for him and his people, prosperity. For Judas, Jesus was a means to an end. And when that didn't work out for Judas, he began to look elsewhere. But Jesus is his own greatest reward. A relationship with Jesus is a reward beyond anything we could ever hope for. In him, we have a relationship with God. We can go to God. But all too often, we tend to be like Judas. We feel that God owes us something. We feel that we can bargain with him and have a trade-off. If you grant me this, then I will follow and worship you. And that's where Judas was. What we are, what Judas was, what we are, is people in need of grace. We're people in need of mercy, people in need of God's love. But when things go wrong, we blame Jesus. We ask him, what's wrong with you? If all this stuff goes on in my life, if all this bad stuff happens to me, it happens all around me, then what good is it to follow you? What are you worth? Instead of basking in his glory and his forgiveness, instead of loving and trusting him, instead of accepting what happens, knowing that God works all things to the good of those people who love him, instead of that, we get bitter and we get mad because he hasn't given us what we wanted. We're more interested in what Jesus can give us than just knowing and trusting and loving him. At that point, Jesus is a means to an end. And that's where Judas was. When suffering comes, when hard times come, we question him and we ask, are you worth it? Why should I follow you? Sometimes we even ask, are you real? Are you really there? Sometimes we're more like Judas than we want to admit. There have been times in my life when I had a price. Times when I doubted, times when I questioned. Times when my commitment was weak. But even though we've had times like that, even though there have been times when we betrayed Jesus, we did just like Judas. Even though there have been those kinds of times, Jesus hasn't given up on us. And he won't give up on us. The true tragedy in the life of Judas. Now, before you shut me down, think about this one. The true tragedy in the life of Judas was that it didn't have to end the way it ended. It could have ended differently. Jesus would have forgiven Judas. You're like, what? Jesus would have forgiven Judas? Matthew 26, verse 69. Peter was sitting in the courtyard. A female servant came to him and said, You were with Jesus the Galilean. But Peter denied it in front of them all by saying, I don't know what you're talking about. As he went to the entrance, another female servant saw him. She told those who were there, this man was with Jesus from Nazareth. Again, Peter denied it and swore with an oath, I don't know the man. After a little while, the men standing there approached Peter and said, It's obvious you're one of them. Your accent gives you away. Then Peter began to curse and swear with an oath, I don't know the man. Just then a rooster crowed. Peter remembered what Jesus had said. Before the rooster crows, you will say 3 times that you don't know me. Then Peter went outside and cried bitterly. Judas sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver, but at least he didn't pretend to have never known him. Peter, the rock, cursed and swore and said, I don't know that man. The difference between Peter and Judas isn't the betrayal. They both betrayed Jesus. The difference is how they acted after the betrayal. Peter humbled himself. Peter humbled himself and accepted Jesus' forgiveness and his salvation. Judas would not humble himself. He wouldn't admit that he was the problem and that he needed grace and mercy. And because he wouldn't humble himself and ask for forgiveness, the most terrible verdict to ever be uttered was bestowed on him. In verse 24, Jesus said, the Son of Man is going to die, as the Scriptures say he will. But how horrible will it be for the person who betrays the Son of Man? It would be better for him that he had never been born. That's where Judas was. That's where we are all too often. We're prideful and we're arrogant. We think that Jesus is here to serve our needs and not the other way around. We need Jesus, and something else in our lives is what we think, just like Judas. But Judas died knowing that it would have been better for him to never been born. Now here's the thing. That does not have to be your fate. If you have never given your heart to Christ, if you've never trusted in Him to be your salvation, then you can rest assured that if you do that tonight, you will live with Him forever in paradise. You will be able to understand the one thing that Judas was not able to grasp, the thing that Judas couldn't wrap his head around. You can rest knowing that Jesus is His own reward. You can rest knowing that Jesus died for your sins so that you could spend eternity with Him and not eternity suffering. Judas had choices, but he made poor choices. You don't have to be that way. If you trust Jesus, if you've given Him your heart, but sometimes you think, this isn't worth it. Sometimes you think following you is not what I want to do. The good news is you can renew your commitment to Him. You can follow Him again. You can follow Him today. All you have to do is ask. All you have to do is ask for forgiveness and He'll give it to you. Just like Peter. He forgave Peter 3 times for the 3 times that Peter denied Him. He'll forgive you as well. You know, Jesus said, ask and you'll receive. He said, knock and the door will be opened. But first, you have to act. First, you have to ask Him. You have to talk to Him. Don't be where Judas was. Trust the Lord. Open your heart and walk with Him. You will not regret it. Lord, I just thank You for the fact that You never, ever gave up on us. That You don't give up on us. That You are there for us. Even when we think that there are better things out there. Even when we decide that, when we decide You're not worth it. Lord, we know better. But we're stubborn sometimes. And we want to do things on our own. And we think that You ought to be rewarding us when we don't really deserve anything. Lord, just help us stay straight. Help us stay focused. Help us keep Your sacrifice in mind. Help us serve You the way we should. Lord, as we go out this week, just keep us safe as we ride. Just keep us pointed in the right direction. Give us people to talk to that we can share Your love with. Lord, we ask it in Your name. Amen.